We are going live.
And can you eliminate that thing that says this is going live in the middle of the screen there?
That should do it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is March 8th, 2022. I am your host, Joe Benning, the chair of the committee. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, we're experiencing for the first time a hybrid meeting of the committee. So in the committee room proper, which is where I am, and I'm the one waving with the window behind me, I have Senator Corey Parent. We also have Alex McCracken, who is our committee assistant. We have on screen Senator Mazza from Colchester, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, and we have Senator McCormick from Windsor County. This afternoon, we are going to be talking about the governor's recommending the capital budget, specifically for capital fund project proposal, critical communications expansion program. And we have the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Administration, Doug Farnham, with us. So Doug, I'm going to welcome you to Senate Institutions. A couple of ground rules. We are still on YouTube. We have no idea who our audience is going to be. I like to pretend that our audience is observing the committee process for the very first time and has no idea how government normally works. So when you begin testifying, what I'd like you to do is identify yourself for the record, please. Give us a little bit of a bio on yourself and how you fit into state government, and then we'll launch into the testimony and ask you questions as we go through. With that, the floor is yours, sir. Welcome to Senate Institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the record, Douglas Farnham, Deputy Secretary of Administration. Quick bio. I've been with the state of Vermont for a little over 10 years now. And prior to that, I was in the 82nd Airborne, served in the military. I spent most of my 10 years at TAX, and recently, as in, oh God, a year and a half now ago, I guess not that recently, but moved over to the Agency of Administration to focus on the federal pandemic spending and the administrative and organizational side of just keeping those programs running, getting them implemented, making sure we're spending the money in federally allowable ways, and trying to stay out of trouble with the auditors. So that has been most of my focus for over the last year, and primarily in the context of the over $2 billion of discretionary money that the federal government allocated to Vermont. And so I think the first item on your agenda, Mr. Chair, was the critical communications program.
Yes, sir.
So I think with that program in particular, that program is proposed to be funded by the ARPA Capital Projects Fund. So when I say ARPA, I mean the American Rescue Plan Act that was passed almost exactly a year ago at this point. Apparently this is ARPA anniversary week. So hard to believe we've been working on it for a year now, but the American Rescue Plan Act created multiple funding sources, one of them being the Capital Projects Fund. And Vermont's allocation of that fund is $113 million. And this proposal was intended to take approximately $44 million of that $113 million. The other important, just high level things, and I know I'm covering a little bit of old ground here, Mr. Chair, but I apologize for that. The other important aspects is that the money has to be spent by 12/31/2026, so by the end of 2026, and it must be obligated by the end of 2024, meaning through either a formal contract or grant agreement, the state of Vermont has to reach an agreement with someone else outside the state on how that money is going to be expended. If we do that before 2024, then we have a little bit longer to spend it. So the example would be if we reach a grant agreement with a town to improve their one of their municipal buildings, they could work in 2025 and 2026 to improve that building, but we need to reach that agreement by the end of 2024. Any unobligated funds at the end of 2024, Treasury doesn't quite say exactly how they're going to approach that closeout, but the but the implication is that we might lose that money if it was not obligated at the end of 2024. And then the other really important aspect of this fund, this $113 million, is that it is a grant application process. So the ARPA state fiscal recovery, which the legislature appropriated over 500 million, actually a little over 600 million of that money last year. That is really a discretionary fund where the funds were advanced to Vermont, and the states were given a lot of discretion within a federal rule of how to utilize that money. This capital projects fund is under a different model. We have to file a grant plan, and that plan can be submitted at any point right now, but is due by September 24th of this year. So we have about 6.5 months at this point in which to construct a grant plan that Treasury would review and approve. So the main difference there is that for other ARPA money, the legislature can create a program. The administration designs the program within the intent of the legislation, and then we just go from there. We immediately, as quickly as we can, we start delivering benefit to Vermonters. In this case, the legislature intends to appropriate the $113 million, and then the administration will have to submit a grant plan to Treasury based on the legislative approvals, and we will see if Treasury will accept that grant plan or if they will require modifications in order to approve. I think because we have to submit the grant plan, there's a slightly different dynamic with this funding than we've become used to with the Coronavirus Relief Fund from 2020 and the state fiscal recovery funds from ARPA. So I think that's kind of the high level information I wanted to start out with, Mr. Chair. And I also wanted to just offer myself for the committee for any questions. I know last time when we were discussing this program, I had another obligation, so I was unable to stay. So I apologize for that. But let me pause there. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Back me up just a little bit. You were talking about the 113 million. This is the fund that is accessible to all three branches of government, if you will. Is that correct?
Yes. So Act 50 of last year, Mr. Chair, set in law a process by which this $113 million would be appropriated. Act 50 stated that all three branches, executive, judicial, and legislative, would propose their uses of this fund, and it would be accounted for or authorized in the capital bill BAA of this session. So I think from a process perspective, absolutely, Mr. Chair, it's intended to be consisting of proposals from all three branches of government. Yes.
So the administration has proposed spending all 113 in the projects that it currently has on the table. Is that still the case?
So the administration did propose $113 million of programs, knowing that it would join a list, and the merits of those proposals would be weighed against the merits of the legislative proposals or the judicial proposals.
Yep.
I would say that under the rules of the ARPA Capital Projects Fund, which were not published at the time of Act 50, I would struggle to see how the judicial branch could fit within the guidance that the Treasury has since published. So I think that, yes, Act 50 created a structure to collect all those concepts, but because they have to fit into the federal categories, I would say the executive branch has proposed 113 million of programs, but none of them, with the exception of the Wi-Fi in parks proposal, which was 1.5 million, none of those programs actually deal with traditional state buildings. And I think the thought at the time of Act 50's passage was that this was a capital projects fund and would really impact state buildings, where we normally spend capital dollars. but Treasury's rules were very strongly designed to be outwardly facing community structures, not state buildings, essentially.
So one of our obstacles in Senate institutions is that we don't get the capital bill until after crossover, when the House is done doing with it what it chooses. You have, I'm assuming, brought this proposal forward to House Corrections and Institutions for their conversation. Do you have any sense of where things are going with that conversation on that side of the building?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have discussed all of the proposals from the executive branch for the 113 million with House Corrections and Institutions. I would say that that the House committee does have reservations about the approach of, the executive proposing $113 million of proposals as well. They had been thinking of it from the starting point of where we left off last year's legislative session. So I would say that, they have been giving our proposals time. We have been discussing them. I wouldn't say that we have, fully won over the committee on those proposals yet. And I would say that there are other potential proposals being considered in House policy committees that could also utilize some of the $113 million, which I think the administration is obviously open to those being weighed against our proposals.
Okay. Specifically with respect to the critical communications system, what is the proposal that's now on the table, and how's it going on the House side?
So the proposal that's on the table is for 51 million to go towards building of cell towers in areas of the state which are not generally economically viable for the cell phone, either the tower owners or the providers of cell phone service to build in. There are areas of our state where we just don't have enough people to make it worth economically viable for them from a business's perspective. So
what
the proposal.
What would that 51 million buy us?
I apologize, Mr. Chair. Clay Purvis has the details much more readily at hand. I believe it is, I shouldn't say because I'll probably get it wrong. I know that it's either 150 or 100 towers, but I was mostly focused on here. Sorry, I'm pulling up Mr. Purvis's materials from last time, and that 51 million would get.
And the press has been reporting 100 towers, but
yes,
you'll have there.
Yeah, that is the estimate for it to be. Yeah, 100 towers, an average of 200,000 per tower is going to construction. So yes, 100 towers.
So is there a game plan afoot that if you don't get all of that money, where you would be concentrating what you are able to secure?
So I think the game plan, Mr. Chair, is partly would be based on the Treasury's response to our grant plan, but the Treasury's guidance heavily focuses on disadvantaged communities, communities with lower incomes, communities with indicators that show they really are in need of assistance. And I do think that those communities in Vermont overlay very strongly with the areas where we do not have cell phone coverage right now anyway. So I think there's a strong correlation, but I think that if the whole 51 million isn't appropriated, then, and a smaller number of towers were deployed, it would just be a matter of prioritizing where the largest gaps in coverage are, where we can help people the most with that money. And I know that one area that the House committee wanted more information on was that part of the plan is that PSD, the Public Service Department, is conducting an assessment. They're currently undergoing another coverage assessment so that we know where our gaps are. So we don't have the picture of exactly where those gaps are yet. We're in the process of gathering that. And then that coverage map, that where we identify our gaps, would inform the grant plan in September so that we know which communities we want to prioritize and help first. So I would think that when we rank these gaps in their severity and in how much they can help a community, that would inform, if we had to do it with less money, where we would try to build those towers.
Okay. What else can you tell us about the proposal?
So I think the one thing I can say is that the state fiscal recovery funds, the coronavirus relief funds, a lot of the other funds that Vermont, the one-time federal funds that Vermont has had access to recently, they don't fit as well with this cell tower proposal. One reason I was personally excited by this proposal was because it pairs up the rules of this particular fund with a very strong need in Vermont right now. I grew up in the Northeast Kingdom. I know traveling around Vermont, I can predict where the dead spots are going to be, where my calls are going to get dropped. Sometimes I'll hang up and say, I'll call you in 4 minutes when I get back into, service area. So, I think that it's an opportunity to utilize the federal funding that has really strict guardrails around it. And if you look at what we've done with CRF and what we're doing with state fiscal recovery, it really is a unique effort. There's not another program where we're trying to expand our cell coverage. So I think that this is an interesting proposal because it does meet a need that I think all Vermonters are aware of. And it aligns the federal funding source very well with a gap in Vermont right now.
So a quick question, north or south of Sheffield Heights?
I think south. I was on the border of the kingdom. I was out near Peacham when I grew up. So
it's a critical question for this committee because I have to either razz Senator Ingalls or he razzes me. So we wanted to make sure.
They stole the name Kingdom. They went and they tagged it legally. So we allow them to call themselves a kingdom because they did a little bit of that. But we know where the real kingdom is.
Yeah, we've taken arrangements for the reapportionment lines are going to put north of Sheffield Heights into Canada, in case you hadn't heard. Doug, I'm not sure. Well, let me go back a half a step. These towers, are these all 5G towers?
I am not certain about that, Mr. Chair. Mr. Purvis is much more the expert on the
Okay. We're probably going to have you end up coming back when we get more into the conversation once we get the bill that we can actually work on. Committee, any questions? Senator Ingalls.
Deputy Secretary, thank you for your testimony. And I just want to reiterate, using this money in one-time ways is so important. We experienced something up here that a lot of politicians don't want to talk about, but the EB-5 program. It's kind of a scary thing, and I don't expect very many people who are involved with it to really talk favorably of it. But I will tell you that us being up here in an area that would never see that type of expansion, always worried about whether it could sustain itself. And the best thing that's happened is that they found that there was some people in there that were doing some bad things. They got rid of them. And we're finding out now that all that infrastructure that was put up here could be very well supported and that it didn't cost the taxpayers of Vermont a bunch of money. So I applaud your efforts to do this infrastructure upgrades. It's so important to bring the rural areas of Vermont into the 21st century. I hope that I hope that we can stay with that plan and benefit all of Vermont with these one-time funds.
Any other committee questions? Senator McCormick, you're gonna have to yell if you decide you want to ask a question because I can't see you on the screen. Doug, I want to thank you for coming by. I understand you're going to be with us for the next section as well. So committee, we're going to shift gears for the moment and move on to talk about resilient community centers. And we have a secretary, Julie Moore, of the Agency of Natural Resources, as well as the commissioner of the Department of Buildings and General Services. And of course, Doug is back. So we are honored to have all of you present today. If you'd like to join us at the table.
Well, can we give your other committee members a hard time?
You absolutely.
Where are they? I came, Senator Mazza and the rest of you, because I wanted to see your faces in person. You're letting me down.
I paid $4.50 a gallon of gas or whatever it is.
So your other members here get bonus points and lots of stars for being here in person.
Come on up and join us.
All right.
And I'm on camera because I'm on sick leave here. I am.
All right, that's fair. Being on sick leave is a good reason.
Okay. Thanks.
And Alex, I sent you the presentation. I don't know, is there a way for me to share it that everyone can see it?
Yes, I believe you have to join the Zoom meeting for that. But
Oh.
if you'd like to be
I
in charge
can-
of the PowerPoint, then I can give you screen sharing from the Zoom meeting.
All right, just 1 second and I will join the Zoom meeting.
So once again, I'll give the same explanation I give to all witnesses who come in. We are on YouTube. We have no idea who's out there in YouTube land. We try to keep the conversation at a level where if, for instance, a 5th grade class were to join us for the first time learning about the committee process and how things work in government, we will try to make sure that you're testifying about something that we all may understand, but I think they may not. They might interrupt you. I'm not trying to be rude, but just to ask you to try to explain what X, Y, or Z means. One of the first things that I ask everybody to do is just give a brief bio of who you are and how you fit into state government so that they know who you are. And the floor right now is yours, unless I start interrupting, but we're going to learn about something that is called resilient community centers, which assumes that we don't have any such thing right now. Is that safe to say?
I don't think I'd go that far.
Okay.
I think this is an overall though improvement. All right, I'm not gonna join with audio.
You should have screen share. They will email in like 15 minutes.
Okay.
Slide there.
We are learning how to reassemble in the building, and some of us have to go elsewhere during the middle of this conversation. So if Corey gets up to leave, now you go by, but he'll be back.
So don't hold it against him.
Yeah, not being rude.
Okay.
We
Understood.
get special brownie points.
I was gonna say, you already have stars.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
That's right, you're ahead.
you're starting at an advantage.
All right.
Okay, I think I've got the,
Is that working for you?
I just didn't have the presentation open. So now I've got that. And if I Sorry, technology. Here we go.
Perfect. That looks like it's working on my end.
All right, and if I do it this way. All right,
Yeah,
excellent. So thank you very much for having me. Julie Moore. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. The agency is 3 departments: Fish and Wildlife, Forest and Parks, and Environmental Conservation. And also is serving as the kind of point or intergovernmental coordination around all things climate in the governor's budget. And that's sort of how this project tucked up under ANR. That said, it also errantly showed up under ANR in the budget as that was put forward. And in reality, it's a BGS-led initiative. And so very glad Jennifer could be here today. And along with Doug Farnham from the Agency of Administration, and we'll sort of tag team on this proposal. I thought I could give a high-level overview of what's envisioned here. and then happy to answer questions folks may
It
have.
may very well be that we have you back once we get our hands on the capital bill to get into some of the finer weeds. So a high level
Sure.
overview is great.
Okay, and I saw you were just hearing about the cell tower initiative too, which is part of the same package. So I've sort of sliced and diced this two ways. The governor's overall budget includes north of $215 million worth of climate investments. That includes establishing this office, the climate office within the Agency of Natural Resources, more than $160 million in ARPA funds, some one-time money to be used as FEMA match, and then this proposal related to the federal coronavirus capital projects fund. So there are 4 projects in total that were on the part of the governor's recommended list. This one clocked in just north of $44 million. As you might guess, that dollar figure is very specific, but that's really a reflection of it sort of just balancing the state parks against the state parks connectivity initiative, where we actually had a very specific dollar amount because it's gone far enough through the process that we have a real handle on what that's likely to cost. So in terms of what we were looking at in developing this project is the US Treasury guidance that says for projects to be eligible for this capital projects fund, they have to meet all of the criteria shown on this page. Investments in capital assets that directly enable health monitoring, education, or work. And that's going to be a really important component of how this proposal is structured. Identify or addressing a critical need from the COVID-19 pandemic and a critical need of the community it serves. Under the guidance, there is also a handful of opportunities identified as presumptively eligible projects. So the way these proposals are going to work, and I may be repeating myself from stuff Doug shared with you previously, is the state will have to submit a proposal to Treasury, and Treasury will let us know if our projects qualify. These multi-purpose community facility projects are an area that's been identified as presumptively eligible. So hopefully it's a slightly lower bar in terms of meeting that burden of proof to the feds that this is a good project. And it focuses on projects to construct or improve buildings that enable this work, education, and health. But those activities don't have to be the exclusive function of the project. And so what you'll see is a combination as we get to it of investments related to telehealth, ensuring we have those spaces available to community members and high-speed broadband access, but also making these more functional civic spaces in general. And then we'll need to be able to explain why the projects, why the communities we've identified have this critical need. So in terms of the Resilient Community Centers proposal specifically, this is a broad-based collaborative effort with BGS in the lead, but also involves ANR, the Agency of Commerce, and particularly Housing and Community Development, Public Service Department, the Health Department, and Vermont Emergency Management. And there's a lot of good work that state government's already done that we'll be able to build on as part of this, including work done by DPS to look at Wi-Fi hotspots, the Accessibility Modernization Grant Program administered by ACCD that looks at ADA accessibility for many of our town buildings, audits that are currently being led by BGS under the SEMP, some local emergency management work related to the availability of shelters that VEM has completed, as well as the climate action plan. And so the proposal contemplates investments in these public-facing municipal buildings, so town halls, community centers, libraries, that will improve them in a way that both helps meet 21st century community needs, most notably broadband access, but also achieves Vermont's climate goals in improving these spaces. And so this initiative would expand locations where community members can reliably access high-speed internet, but can also then be used to improve those existing buildings through things like weatherization, fuel switching, fitting them up to be emergency shelters, which could include battery storage, looking at opportunities to install rooftop solar or build out electric vehicle charging networks. And so there's sort of an inordinate amount of opportunity in these spaces. We think these projects could be really exciting. We've also engaged in work that's being led by the House Energy and Technology Committee around H1 518, which is specific to fuel switching. It's sort of a subset of this bill. We've talked with them about this proposal. I think the bill that they've passed out of committee remains somewhat narrower than what's envisioned here. But we have been in communication with them over the course of time, recognizing that it does meet several of the same needs. But we think this is an incredibly exciting opportunity. Know that there's an enormous amount of demand, sort of drawing from the combined knowledge gained from these different studies and assessments that agencies have undertaken over the last several years, and would be thrilled to answer any questions you might have.
Where is H518 now?
I believe it is in House Appropriations.
When you said it's narrower than what this plan was calling for, you know what?
I can let Jennifer speak to that because that bill really directly implicates BGS.
That is correct. So H518 started.
Can you introduce
Oh, I'm
yourself?
sorry, I apologize.
All right.
I can tell you that I haven't done this in the study yet. So my name is Jennifer Fitch. I am the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. Buildings and General Services is most notably an internal service organization, and our job is really to support primarily other state agencies, departments, and branches of government. So with that, H518 primarily started as a fuel switching bill. Laura Sibilia and Representative Brigland are the two that sort of created this bill. They've been working on it since the summer, and that was prior to the administration proposing resilient community centers. And so we have been working collaboratively with Representative Sibilia to broaden the bill. One of the challenges is that this is a pre-application process. Did you mention that? So, and Doug, this is really his world, so he can speak to it more than I can, but it's a pre-application process. So with a lot of the ARPA funds, basically they allocate the funds to you and then you can spend them accordingly. In this particular situation, before you can spend the money, you actually have to put in a grant request to the federal government. And they're looking for the three things that Secretary Moore mentioned, which is sort of telehealth, broadband, I'm trying to think of it.
Work, education, and telehealth.
Work, education, and telehealth. So it has to have those three components essentially. It doesn't have to be just those three components, but those three components do have to be addressed within the proposal. And so we've been working with Representative Sibilia to try to broaden the bill. We still believe that there are some potential challenges, the way that it's written, and it has definitely gotten broader, but we're not confident it's broad enough yet that the federal government would approve the application. So we are continuing to work. In fact, tomorrow morning I have a meeting with Deputy Secretary Farnham and members of the House Corrections and Institutions along with House Appropriations, and we're going to try to go back over the bill as it stands right now.
We talked about a climate office. What is the number of individuals who are going to be employed in that, and what would their functions be?
Sure. So as envisioned, it would be a total of 8 staff in the climate office. 4 of those positions are existing with existing sources of funding. A 5th position is an existing limited service position, our climate forester position that's been funded with a grant that would be brought into the climate office, but would need to have salary covered come the end of this year. And then 3 new positions, one related to data and tracking, one related to community engagement and reporting, and one supporting policy development and economic analysis. This is the climate office would be funded with a total of $1.1 million in general fund. There's $450,000 a year currently being provided to the agency that was initially appropriated with the passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act. That would be increased to $1.1 million in the FY23 budget to support this staff. And it would be at the coordinating sort of hub for intergovernmental activity around climate action and the implementation initiatives, probably early on focused on all of the ARPA related proposals, And then later on, additional initiatives needed to support the attainment of the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
So we have a big chunk of money that right now from the federal government. And assuming that's going to dry up at some point in time, is the plan that these positions are going to be continued into the future?
It is. We anticipate this is a long-term commitment needed to achieve the 2025, 2030, and 2050 goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Committee, I don't know if anybody's got questions. Don't see anybody chomping at the bit. We stopped you with questions. Did you have more you wanted?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
No, I have clean water, which is for you next.
Shift gears into that conversation. I just didn't know if anybody else had any thoughts or wanted to let us know something.
I mean, I just think it's a really exciting opportunity, and it's great that ANR had the foresight to offer this as a proposal for the spending of the money, but it's really about investing in our communities and making sure that they come out stronger than they were prior to COVID, and making sure that they have access to essential services. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to support our communities, and we hope that we're going to get support from this committee. How
has the conversation been received in the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions?
I think they were interested in the proposal. There was a lot of good discussion of it when we came in. I think, to be frank, that Chair Emmons is still wrestling with some of the language in, I think it was Act 50 of last year, that indicated all three branches of government should be bringing forward proposals, and just how all of that fits. Doug has spoken previously, and would love for him to chime in about, we need both a list and probably some alternates as we approach Treasury, because obviously the legislature will be out of session in all likelihood when we bring this proposal in. And if they reject any of our ideas as being ineligible, we'll want to be able to move quickly to swap in something else.
Right.
But I think there is a generally broad understanding that community centers, town halls have a lot of are outdated at this point, don't serve as those 21st century civic spaces. And this is an opportunity to make some really significant investments in a significant number of the centers statewide.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes, Doug, go ahead. Sure.
So just in case someone just started watching this session, Doug Farnham, Deputy Secretary of Administration. Yeah, I think one of the key things with whichever proposal ends up being authorized for the ARPA Capital Projects Fund is going to be making sure there's enough flexibility to get that grant plan through in the first year. If we don't have enough flexibility to make sure the grant plan can be adjusted, if Treasury pushes back, has corrections required, if we have too narrow of a focus without authority to broaden it as necessary, I think we might run into a situation where we have to wait for an entire legislative session, and we have a very short clock on using this money. When you consider it's for capital purposes, having capital work done, by the end of 2026 is a pretty tall order. And I think one thing we've done with all these packages is they're about as aggressive as we'd like to go. With the cell tower proposal, that was as much work as we thought we could accomplish in the amount of time. Same thing with this community center proposal. And then I think the differences between H518 and this proposal, it really is about where the priorities are. And at the end of the day, Treasury is going to be the one that approves. Like, we can prioritize as much as possible on the Vermont side, but then Treasury will only be willing to approve certain expenses in the grant plan. And I think one thing we've gotten advice from our contractor Guidehouse on is Treasury has focused a lot of language on proportionality. And for example, switching out an oil furnace that is dying, it's at end of life, for a newer, more modern, clean energy source is probably going to be acceptable. Switching out a 5-year-old oil furnace for a clean energy source from a treasury perspective is not likely to be acceptable. So I think they're going to be, Treasury, when I say they, I mean Treasury, is going to be imposing financial restrictions on how we spend this money that we're not feeling in our other programs in state fiscal recovery and CRF. That's not a requirement, that those constraints weren't placed there. The other thing, and this is more of an indicator than anything else, Mr. Chair, is that Treasury is also applying cash management principles, which means we need to track every dollar, we need to track the interest, and we need to only request the money from Treasury when the work is done and when we're paying for the work. So this particular program has much stronger and more persistent Treasury oversight. And that's one reason the administration's recommending programs that are well within the goalposts that Treasury's established, so that we can be comfortable that we'll be able to get the work done, because we'll secure Treasury approval quickly, and we won't have them asking for a lot of extra justification, a lot of extra arguments as to how our program is going to meet their requirements. So I think that's why this program was designed the way it was, with the priorities set to include things like, heat switching, weatherization, but focus on the way Treasury has published their guidance and trying to get an easier approval, essentially, from the U.S. Treasury.
So this entire conversation is also subject to the same dateline requirements of being obligated by the end of 24 and being spent by the end of 26.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And the bigger hurdle for this committee is to figure out where all these pieces fit once we actually get the bill by which we're supposed to be making sure this all works. And you also have normal problems of supplies and plans and all of that being accomplished. It sounds like a pretty tall order, but we'll see how it goes. And in all likelihood, we'll have you guys all back so we can figure out what exactly the House did and how we're supposed to tweak if we need to tweak.
But to Deputy Secretary Farham's point, right, this is all about being as efficient as we can to make sure that when we do submit, it comes back with a green light, because if it doesn't, if with the yellow or red, it's going to slow us down and it's going to impede our ability to get out the door. The other thing is we don't want to leave any dollars on the table, right? We've got this appropriation and we want to spend every dollar of it. So to the extent that we can set ourselves up for success today, it's critically important to getting the money out the door.
Right.
Well, hopefully that committee on the other side of the building will get us something to actually stamp our approval to.
And another thing I would add for Mr. Chair is that H518 set the stage for determining eligibility at the municipal level, and said, because municipalities directly enable work, telehealth, education, then they would be eligible for this program. And that is not how, in my opinion, at least, just my opinion, and my contractor's opinion, that is not how Treasury is writing the guidance. That's not how they're interpreting it. The project itself, the building itself, is what matters, not the entity or the owner of the building, but the building itself has to enable. And I know there is some language in there about having one room be dedicated to facilitating remote work and things like that, which is a path to eligibility. But our hesitancy there is that Treasury is going to ask questions about proportionality. They're going to make sure we're spending their money wisely, because in their opinion, this isn't Vermont's money, right? This is Treasury's money. And if we're overhauling a building, but we're only getting one space out of that entire building, and we're spending, several $100,000 to get that one space made, they're going to view that as an inefficient use of their funds. So I think that's where, again, as Commissioner Fitch said, we don't want to push the edges too far on interpreting Treasury's guidance, because we're going to have to get permission from them to access even $1 of this money.
And as H518 stands right now, it's a process of elimination. So you have to have the fundamental requirements already in your building, right? The goal is to get this out to the underserved communities. So it's going to be the communities that have been investing in their buildings all along that will be able to qualify. What we want to do is target the ones that have been underserved, that haven't been making these investments or haven't had the funding to make these investments. So that's why there needs to be greater flexibility in H518 if that's gonna end up being the vehicle for this proposal.
Really goes back to the, some of those foundational criteria that are in the Treasury guidance about explaining why the communities have a critical need for such projects. And I think, you know, that House Energy and Technology may have interpreted that critical need to be climate change as opposed to the enabling language that came from Treasury, that it's real, the critical need needs to be tied to COVID-19 and the community it serves.
Okay, a lot of moving parts. Committee, any other questions? We're cruising right
Yeah,
along.
Mr.
here.
Chairman?
Yes,
Chairman.
sir.
Yeah.
Dick, go ahead.
Your understanding of how Treasury interprets critical need, did I understand you correctly that probably climate would not be considered a critical need?
So Senator McCormick, I'll speak to that one. Yes, so the Treasury has not included, and I was hopeful that they would include some language about climate mitigation and climate resilience in their rules and in their guidance. And they actually did not. They backed off of that. So what they have said is that communities, in order to receive assistance, need to be they need to be a disadvantaged community, and generally that's going to be from a financial metric. And we have a large number of disadvantaged communities that would qualify for this type of assistance. And then the other thing that they said is that the projects themselves must directly enable work, education, or telehealth. Increasing climate change resilience, unfortunately, isn't in their kind of approved outcomes for a project. I think that they will look favorably on it. The Biden administration obviously cares about climate change. So I think where we are achieving both goals will be fine and will receive approval. But if that's the only thing we're achieving, then I don't think Treasury is going to be able to allow that.
You mentioned like stressed communities. What's the term you used?
Treasury uses the term disadvantaged communities.
Disadvantaged. Now, does that specifically mean geographically defined communities, or can that be demographics, classes of people who are disadvantaged?
Generally speaking, the Treasury is using that geographically. They're looking at a town, a city, or even in some cases a neighborhood or a census tract. They've divided, in some other areas, they've divided it up into census tracts to go that granular.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, we are right on time here. We're gonna shift gears.
You want to say the clean water?
I'm gonna mosey on down.
Well, good seeing you again.
But see, I hope at some point, Senators, I'm gonna get an opportunity to see you all in person this session, so that you can all get your gold stars.
I will have to say, Commissioner, I saw a picture of your daughter on Facebook.
Oh,
If she's not a clone, I don't know what is.
I know, she's a clone in pretty much every way, so imagine that.
Great remark.
CSI.
We'll have you back again, I'm sure.
Thank you, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
We are now joined as well by Daniel Dickerson, Fiscal Analysis for the Joint Fiscal Office. Dan, welcome to Senate Institutions. I'm hoping that, well, you're welcome to join us up here at the table if you'd like.
Sure.
And I don't know who's leading the charge on this conversation.
I had just a slide, so maybe I'll go back to sharing my screen.
Okay.
Oops, wrong screen.
So just for the YouTube audience, we're talking about clean water investments and how they relate to clean water projects in the capital bill, which of course is the vehicle that we use in this committee to actually accomplish something here.
So, yes, so I've got just one table that hopefully will help. There's a lot of moving pieces in this space, and I think it's led to some confusion. Doug has the another hat he wears in addition to knowing everything about ARPA is he's also the chair now of the Clean Water Board. So it's very timely that he's available to be part of this conversation today too. So what I tried to do is get this all into one sheet. Hopefully I've succeeded, but looking at the clean water capital budget, some of the ARPA swaps that were related to that clean water capital budget, and then a couple of additional items that are in the FY23 budget adjustment that have a nexus with clean water, but weren't part of what the Clean Water Board actually discussed. So as the committee may recall, there's the Clean Water Fund, which is a combination of the Escheats property transfer tax surcharge and 6 points from the rooms and meals tax that looks and smells like general fund that the Clean Water Board is responsible for making recommended allocations up to the governor. In addition, the Clean Water Board annually makes a recommendation related to the capital bill and by virtue of language in the FY22 big bill for FY22, 23, and 24, the Clean Water Board has been asked to allocate $10 million of ARPA funding in each of those years.
Julie, just for the sake of our YouTube audience, can you describe briefly what the Clean Water Board is and does?
Absolutely. So the Clean Water Board is a 9-member board. It includes 5 members of the administration, myself and Deputy Secretary Farnham, Secretary Tebbets from the Agency of Agriculture, Secretary Flynn from the Agency of Transportation, and Secretary Curley from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. In addition, there are 4 public members of the board appointed by the governor who serve, I believe, staggered 3-year terms. And so the board's purpose is several-fold. Each year receives reports from the tax department about revenue into the Clean Water Fund, as well as a recommendation from the Secretary of Administration around an appropriate assumption for capital bill funding. Generally, the expectation is $10 to $12 million a year in capital bill funds, and then engages in a public process to allocate those funds across the different components of ANR and state government's clean water work. So looking at agricultural practices, stormwater practices, wastewater treatment, nature-based solutions, and work that the Agency of Transportation leads around stormwater, as well as some of our downtown design projects. The state's total commitment to clean water in most years currently under the current construct is between $40 and $45 million a year. In FY23, we're actually anticipating it'll be up over $46 million a year due to the strong performance of the property transfer tax and the rooms and meals tax.
I was thinking about those funding sources the other day, wondering why and how is it under COVID circumstances, you seem to have revenue streams that are doing quite well. Has there been any conversation about that?
Well,
in addition,
yes.
Are we not committing ourselves to further operational expenses on the basis of that money now coming in higher than usual?
Sure. So I think the property transfer tax in particular has well outperformed expectations. And I think that's a result of the fact that Vermont has weathered the COVID storm very favorably. And as a result, we've seen a lot of interest in taking up residence here. The Escheats, the unclaimed bottle deposits also spiked, particularly very early in the pandemic when I think folks just didn't go to the redemption center and instead like to believe they put them in their recycling. And the rooms and meals taxes continued to perform better than expected. We had reduced our revenue projections very early in the pandemic based on recommendations from the tax department. They proved conservative, and so we've actually benefited from having done some fairly conservative budgeting for FY21 in the years that come. Most of these dollars are being invested directly into projects as opposed to programs that are less scalable maybe. And frankly, to the extent resources are less than they are currently, we would just construct a smaller number of projects. The legislature also passed Act 76 in 2019, which relates to clean water service providers. Those are organizations that are working on some of supporting the implementation of projects that aren't required by a permit issued by either ANR, Ag, or V-Trans. And as part of that role, they are assisting folks who are building voluntary clean water projects with the ongoing maintenance of those systems. And so it's sort of built into the budget we're providing to those clean water service providers at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So just walking through the table that's up on the screen, the recommendation that the Clean Water Board started from, based on input from the Agency of Administration, was to assume we would have about $11 million in capital bill funds available in FY23. And that leftmost gray column shows what the Clean Water Board's initial recommendation was in terms of how to allocate those capital bill dollars. The governor then identified some adjustments as part of his budget or ARPA swaps, responding to the directive in the FY22 budget that up to $15 million worth of eligible projects could be swapped, and identified just north of 4.3 million. So sort of bringing the capital bill recommend in what you've seen this year in the budget adjustment down to that 6.66 figure. In addition, and I put this column in here because we're talking about ARPA in sort of two different ways when it comes to the clean water budget. There is that $10 million that was allocated to the Clean Water Board for use in the, I'm sorry, that should have said August 2022, not 21. Allocated for use as part of the 23 budget. And the Clean Water Board has recommended investing that $10 million in expanding water quality grants to farmers, as well as a bunch of stormwater implementation work.
So just for the edification of our YouTube audience, can you walk down the left-hand column and identify the initials?
Yes, AAFM is the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. VHCB is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. It's not an entity of state government, but it's closely related and can be directly appropriated to. And then the remaining ones are all parts of the Agency of Natural Resources. The first line going to the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. The next line going to the Department of Environmental Conservation Clean Water Initiative Program. And then the last two lines are in our Water Investment Division, which is really focused on wastewater treatment facilities and related infrastructure.
Thank you.
And so you can see it still all totals out to the 21 million. We had initially anticipated. It's just a somewhat different mix of ARPA and capital bill dollars than the Clean Water Board had contemplated when it met last in December. In addition, just flagging that there was $500,000 worth of ARPA swaps that were able to be made with our FY22 capital bill appropriation, again in that same ANR FPR line for BMPs and state forests and recreational access points. And then there are two additional capital bill items that were included in the FY23 proposal. The first being $2.8 million of additional match for the drinking water and clean water state revolving funds. You can see we have the 1.5 million on the second from the bottom line in the table, which is sort of our standard allocation from EPA. But under the bipartisan infrastructure bill or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, we are anticipating additional funding to come to Vermont, and that 2.8 million is the 10% match we're required to provide in order to access those funds. And then the final item on my list there is $3.5 million for dam safety improvements. As you may recall, in 22, we had come in with a request for some ARPA funding for dam safety improvements. It was part of the governor's water infrastructure package. There were a lot of outstanding questions about whether it was actually an ARPA eligible expense. And ultimately it was moved to one-time general fund monies. There was Treasury guidance, and encourage Doug to jump in here. I think it came out in November of last year that indicated dam safety improvements are not ARPA eligible. And so that $3.5 million is essentially a second year of funding for that work that was initiated with the one-time general fund monies provided in FY22.
Correct, Secretary Moore. The dam safety language is limited to dams which provide drinking water only. So much of the work that needs to be done in Vermont is not on dams that provide drinking water. And that's why the Treasury's narrower language that came out at the end of 2021 didn't work for us.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell us about this table? Can you take that down so I can see my committee members?
Yes.
Please. Committee, any questions? Senator Mazza.
We just passed a first time in Colchester, a bond or a sewer, first phase of a sewer, and we got $10 million. Where did that come through? Is that different? That's for lake quality, or is that because the bond passed first time we got sewer? We're so excited in Colchester. So
Yes, no, that is funding that will come from our state revolving loan fund program. So
Okay.
those SRF programs, they really are revolving funds. What we're showing in our table each year is just the ongoing capitalization of new federal dollars that is sort of added to the corpus of that revolving fund. I think we have a balance at this point of somewhere between 80 and $90 million that we're cycling through projects. And it just becomes a really complicated accounting. So our convention all along has just been to show what is needed to capitalize new funds as opposed to the total sort of cycling of money through our state revolving fund in any given year. We were also very happy to see that bond pass in Colchester.
God, we worked hard on it, but we got it through. It's such an exciting thing, as large as Colchester is, and we tried 3 times. This time it worked because of the added funds, and it'll be just financed through user fees, and the taxpayer won't be paying extra for taxes. So thank you. It was very, very well done. Yep.
So the state then provides the initial funding to make the necessary changes. The town bonds for returning the money back to the state. Is that the nature of this revolving fund?
There's actually a step before that. So the
Okay.
state has to provide 20% of the overall award we receive from EPA. So I'm gonna make it easy on myself and say, we provide $2 million, EPA gives us 8, so we have 10. We're then able to make loans and grants out of that pot of money. And the loan part is repaid to us over time. I believe municipalities have to bond for the entire loan amount. And then forgiveness is calculated, or subsidy, depending on how you like to refer to it, is calculated based on sort of the availability of funds. And we have a priority point system where different types of projects receive additional subsidy.
Okay. Other questions, committee? I don't see anybody else. Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Dan, did you want to jump in here or something?
I have a really exciting background about clean water, and the secretary covered it all for me, so she took my job today.
Well, welcome back to Senate Institutions. I believe that covers the issue. I am sure you may have heard previously that we don't have the capital bill yet. We are trying to stay abreast of everything that the House committee is doing with the capital bill, which is why we have invited you here now. It may very well be that they do some tweaking to it, and we need to pick up this conversation at some point. But it's probably going to be real fast and furious by the time we get the bill. We have a very limited amount of time before all of us want to be out of the building. So I'm hoping that things come together well for you on the other side, and we'll see what we get delivered as a package.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I heard somebody.
Sorry, that was me, Mr. Chair. May
Sure.
I add something?
Sure.
So I would say that we have received feedback on the House side that the amounts the administration proposed for FY22 swap I think Secretary Moore mentioned it was around 500,000, was much lower than anticipated. And we've kind of gone through the reasoning, and I'm sure we'll walk through that with your committee, Mr. Chair. In general, it's largely due to timing and the fact that the money went out as general fund Vermont dollars and would require amendment of grant agreements to impose federal terms retroactively, which isn't always possible or feasible, right? So the reason that the administration didn't propose a larger number for the FY22 swap, even though those activities were clearly eligible as ARPA activities, was primarily timing and the circumstances. And I think there are some areas where the administration followed the directive from last year's budget and constructed the capital budget to perform certain swaps. And I think in some areas it will probably be worth the committee's discussion because in some areas providing grants to small farmers with federal terms attached, it's not always the most efficient course of action. But we felt we had to honor the directive in last year's budget in constructing this. So I think that particular concern would affect the VHCB line item the most. And I think I would trust VHCB to talk about, about their concerns if they have any on that particular line item once you have the capital bill. But I think that's why, we proposed swapping over $4 million in FY23. But, an eighth of that for FY22, it was mostly timing.
Doug, just for your edification, I first became familiar with this committee in 2011. And other committees in the building have what's known as a committee of conference if there's conflict between the two sides. In our case, the tradition has always been we send Senator Mazza out into the hallway with Alice Emmons, and they come back with an answer. And that's the way it works. So if you need to do tweaking, I'm just giving you the heads up on where the seed needs to be planted. Well, thank you all for coming by today. And I'm sure we'll be talking some more. Committee, my next assignment is at 3:30. So we're going to take a break until about 3:25 and we'll see you in about 8-9 minutes. We can go up.
Yeah, I'll fix that.
Sorry for